simply but profoundly at the same time. I've read many of his books, and I have to give him credit that I can remember something that I read out of his book that I put into my dissertation. It had to do with the idea of judo. I don't even know if you would remember that, but it was using the power of someone else, and he was talking about sin and redemption, so it was fantastic. So our next speaker really needs very little introduction, and we are very happy that he is joining us this morning for our symposium. Dr. Peter Kreeft is going to speak from a philosophical point of view about the quality of life. So if you could give him a very warm welcome.
Such a title, a philosophical analysis of quality of life, invites us to explore 7 questions. First, what makes anything philosophical? Second, what is analysis? Third, what then is a philosophical analysis? Fourth, what is quality? Fifth, what is life? Sixth, what is quality of life? And seventh, most important, so what? What consequences follow this analysis? The first 5 questions are logical preliminaries, and the 7th and last question is the logical corollary of our main question, what is quality of life? First, philosophy. A nominal definition of philosophy is the love of wisdom. If a real definition corresponded to the nominal definition, we would have real philosophers instead of sophists teaching the subject in all our schools, and then we would be a wise people. For to seek wisdom, or to seek anything else that God is eventually to find it, according to the highest of authorities, God incarnate. The 2 concepts that make up the concept of philosophy as the love of wisdom, namely love and wisdom, are the 2 things that most clearly distinguish philosophers from sophists. Philosophers are in love with wisdom, not with cleverness or intelligence or scientific scholarship, most certainly not their own. Thus, there is a personal qualification for being a philosopher. And that qualification is as rare today as it was in Socrates' day, when there were many more sophists than Socratics. The human heart, unlike human culture, does not essentially change, since it was designed in heaven, not in Hollywood or Harvard. If philosophers are Romeos, their Juliet is wisdom. We all know implicitly what wisdom is, or would be, if we had it. It's not just knowledge, but the most precious kind of knowledge, the knowledge of the good, the knowledge of first things, both theoretically and practically, a knowing of the good that leads to a living of it. That is why all cultures have philosophers, even though few have philosophy departments. In fact, if a culture answers the question, where is philosophy, by pointing to philosophy departments, that culture has put philosophy in prison. Remember, in Boethius' classic Consolation of Philosophy, it is only the philosopher who is in prison, not Lady Philosophy herself. The reasons why most philosophers today no longer define philosophy as the love of wisdom are not hard to discover. They include a personal cynicism, a theoretical skepticism, usually stemming from nominalism and scientism, the reduction of reason to the scientific method, a postmodernist irrationalism as the natural pendulum's reaction to modernist scientific rationalism, an egalitarian culture's suspicion of excellence and hierarchy and high and heroic ideals, and most specifically, skepticism about teleology, about objective ends, especially final ends. 3 of the most unpopular terms in our culture are absolute, objective, and universal. We tend to relativism, subjectivism, and individualism, or at least pluralism. For instance, multiculturalism, which in practice is usually a verbal cover for its exact opposite. Since Moses, Solomon, and Elijah, Buddha, Lao Tzu, and Confucius, Socrates, Plato, and Aristotle, Virgil and Cicero, Augustine and Aquinas, Descartes and Pascal, Akhenaten, Zoroaster, and Muhammad are all omitted in such programs, since all of them were philosophers rather than sophists. All believed in an absolute, objective, and universal good. So this analysis will be philosophical rather than sophistic. Second term, analysis. What's that? Literally, it's the opposite of synthesis. It mentally takes apart, while synthesis mentally puts together. We all begin our experience with a whole, imperfectly understood. And by analyzing it, we enable ourselves to end with the same whole, more perfectly understood. So analysis is for the sake of improved synthesis, a big picture that is better understood and appreciated. The primary question in an analysis is the what question, the search for a real definition of the essence or nature of the thing. This was always the first question for Socrates, but it's often the last question we moderns ask. For we are inveterate nominalists. The spectacular proof of this is my students' utter inability to understand the simplest book ever written about the most commonsensical philosopher in history, Mortimer Adler's Aristotle for Everybody. After repeated inquiries into the reason for their failure, I finally discovered the stumbling block, the concept of form, or essence, or the essential nature of the thing. That concept of a real, objective, absolute, or in itself universal form has become homeless in the modern mind. And this will concern us directly, since we're trying to define the concept of quality of life not nominally but really, not subjectively but objectively, not relatively but absolutely, and not individually but universally. The Greek word logos expresses this concept. It is perhaps the most philosophically rich word in any language. Its only rival is the somewhat similar Chinese word Dao. It's literally dozens of meanings, naturally grouped into three: form, concept, and word. For the real universal nature of the thing, the expression of that nature in the understanding, and the expression of that understanding in language. Modernity's loss of logos is the central reason for its loss of philosophy. For philosophy is the philos of logos, the love of the wisdom that lives in these three dimensions of logos. Definition is the essential and irreplaceable tool of philosophical analysis. But there are also particular methods of analysis that, while not essential and irreplaceable, are helpful. These include the Socratic dialectic, or elenchus, the Platonic search for forms, the Aristotelian method, which appears to me to be essentially an analysis of ordinary linguistic usage combined with phenomenology, the Augustinian method of uniting the heart with the head, the medieval scholastic method, the Cartesian method detailed in the Discourse on Method, the phenomenological method in the modern sense, and even the techniques of modern symbolic logic. So I will shamelessly copy a little bit of all of them. Since we've already practiced what we've preached and analyzed the concept of a philosophical analysis into the concept of philosophy and the concept of analysis, and further analyzed each of these two concepts, it's easy now to combine them in a synthesis and to define a philosophical analysis. Philosophy supplies the end, the aim, wisdom. And analysis gives us the essential method or means, namely defining the concept. So when we philosophically analyze the concept, quality of life, we want to know the definition, the meaning, the value, or the good of all logo, the term, concept, and the reality, quality of life. Our fourth question is then, what is quality? Well, the concept quality is one of the 9 most generic categories, or summa genera, the highest genera, the most extensive and irreducible general classes distinguished by Aristotle. Though other philosophers, notably Kant, have revised Aristotle's list of fundamental categories, they have not quarreled with quality as one of them. For Aristotle, it is one of the 9 accidents, or properties of any thing or substance. Perhaps quality is best understood by contrasting it with quantity. A quantity is always the quantity of a quality or of substances. 6 feet tall, 90 years old, 3 little pigs. Quantity is material, quality is not. You can count the angstrom units that define the color red, but you cannot count the redness of red itself. Thus, there are purely spiritual qualities, such as virtue or truth, and also material qualities, such as weight or size, and mixed qualities, such as beauty or life. Thus, the concept quality of life would be the concept of the quality of equality. If life is the quality of certain substances that make them move and grow from within rather than from without, which is Aristotle's commonsensical definition of life. We'll see that in a moment. That probably means that the concept of quality of life is a confused way of speaking of the quantity of this quality, the number of years left to your life, or the quantity of an accidental quality of this quality, such as the amount of pleasure and pain in your life. In modern parlance, quality also connotes value, or degree of value, degree of excellence, degree of goodness in a thing, whether absolute or relative, whether objective or subjective, whether universal or particular. Aristotle is useful here again, as usual, pointing out that there are three kinds of goodness, which the medievals called the bonum honestum, the bonum utile, and the bonum delectabile. The honest good, the useful good, and the delectable good. That is the intrinsic moral good, what you ought to be and do, the instrumental good, the practical means to some further end, and the good that causes pleasure, happiness, or joy. Which means that there are only three reasons why anyone should ever do anything at all. Because it is moral, because it is useful, or because it is joyful. Which is a wonderful way of simplifying your life. Throw out everything that is neither morally, pragmatically, or hedonistically good for you. If you don't need it to be virtuous, efficient, or happy, you don't need it. Actually, happiness from the ancient Greeks meant something much more than mere subjective satisfaction, whether physical or mental. It also included objective perfection, like a work of art. Thus, a suffering saint like Job could be judged to be happier than a self-satisfied Pharisee or pop psychologist. Practicing that ancient wisdom today would utterly ruin our economy, of course. So no politician ever dares to mention it in public. But since it's a free country, thank God and the Founding Fathers, you can still practice it in private, which is by far the most important area of life, since it will go to heaven with you, while public politics won't. It's rather thrilling to know that you can be a subversive rebel. You can be a happy, practical saint instead of a dissatisfied, in-debt consumer. You can be un-American. People who use the concept quality of life today almost always ignore the first of these three goods, namely moral virtue or character, and judge a person's life in terms of the quantity of the other two qualities, instrumental things like money and time, and subjectively satisfying things like sex or pain. Thus, in their view, poverty and impotence are justifications for suicide. Unfortunately, I'm only half kidding. Now the concept life. What is the meaning of life? I mean by that question not here the great issue of the summum bonum, or the ultimate end of human life, but merely the meaning of the concept life. Since I have you as my captive audience, I will begin by subjecting you to a poem on the subject. Unpublished poets will scruple at nothing to give their own unique products of conception a public birth. The point of this poem is the inadequacy of popular definitions of life. It's called The Meaning of Life. Life's a mystery, life's a race, life's as plain as nose on face. Life is motherhood and pie, life is toys and then you die. Life's a box of chocolates, life is scrubbing dirty pots, life is baseball, life's a ball, life is nothing, life is all. Life's an accident of chance, life's a plan, life's a dance. Life is good, life is evil, life is cotton, life is weevil. Life's a bowl of cherries red, life's a bitch and then you're dead. Life's a glorious work of art, life's a belch, life's a fart. Life is anything you want. Life is Alice's restaurant. Life is peace and life is strife. Life is everything but life. Can we do better than that? I think so. Let's do some metaphysics. Metaphysically, life is the property of self-activity or self-motion. This is true for the most primitive plant, for animals, for humans, and also for pure spirits, angels and men. for they too initiate self-activity. Only dead matter is moved only from without, like billiard balls. Biologically, life is the power of growth from within. Animal life includes two other powers, sensory awareness and instinctive desire. Human life includes those three things, plus two higher powers, intellectual awareness or reason, the power to abstract, to judge, and to argue, or the three acts of the mind, and deliberate free choice. Thus, pre-modern philosophers who used the word soul to mean any kind of life distinguished the vegetative soul, the sensitive or animal soul, and the rational or human soul. Those who speak of the quality of life today usually judge that quality on vegetative or animal principles rather than distinctively human ones, when judging which lives have sufficient lack of quality to justify suicide or euthanasia. The lack of pleasure and the presence of pain, which we share with the animals, and the lack of health and the presence of disease, and the imminence of death, which we share even with plants, are the most usual reasons for judging a life lacking in quality. I wonder how often Dr. Kevorkian has received a request from someone who wants to end it all because he perceived a lack of wisdom and virtue in his life. And there is good reason for that. The higher the good, the freer it is. When we are dying, we are not free to choose to live. When we are in pain, we are only relatively free to choose ways to relieve that pain. But when we are foolish or wicked, we can always choose ways to wisdom and virtue. Now, I have defined life metaphysically, abstractly and universally. It can also be defined phenomenologically as a concrete individual experienced datum or given, as this life or that life, my life or your life. And this is always both more and less than the metaphysical definition of life in general. It is more because individual accidents are added to the universal essence to make it not just a human life, but this unique human life. And it is also less because the individual life that I have lived, the sum total of all the things that I have done, and all the things that have been done to me, is always less than the life I am capable of. I am never totally true to my essence, never completely human, but always also somewhat lacking in humanity. Jean-Paul Sartre defined a person in the most radically reductionistic way as nothing more than his life. Gabriel Marcel replied that my being is always more than my life, and my value or quality is derived from my being more than from my life. Thus, Sartre would say that a professor's typical polite description of a student applying to graduate school as having great potential is meaningless. While Marcel would say it has a far profounder meaning than the professor probably realizes, since we are all potential saints. In fact, compax Dei, capable of divinization. As C.S. Lewis said, the most boring person you ever met will one day be something which, if you saw it now, you would be strongly tempted to worship, or else a horror and a corruption which you meet now, if at all, only in a nightmare. And all day long, we are helping each other to one or the other of these two destinations. There are no ordinary people. Nations, arts, cultures, civilizations, these are ordinary, and their life is to ours as the life of a gnat. But it is immortals who we work with, marry, play with, snub, or exploit, immortal horrors or everlasting splendors. Which of these two philosophies of life prevails, Sartre's or Marcel's and Lewis's, will determine whether our civilization survives and thrives, or withers and dies. And if it dies, it will be literally a euthanasia, a good death, a deserved death. We are now ready to define our concept, quality of life. But we have already implicitly done so, theoretically, as Aristotle or Aquinas did. However, in practice, in actual use today, the concept, quality of life, is never used in this theoretical and metaphysical way. It is always used as a rationalization for practicing suicide or euthanasia. How often have you ever heard the concept quality of life used to rank virtuous and vicious lives? How often have you heard it used to describe the difference between saints and sinners, or between Christ and Antichrist? But that would be the right way to use the concept. The situation surrounding the concept of quality of life today is very similar to the situation surrounding the two concepts, human being and person, today, and the relationship between those two concepts. In both cases, there is an unbridgeable gulf between what we might call the theoretical and the practical use of the terms, between the metaphysical meaning and the meaning in actual use today. Let's look at that parallel. Metaphysically, a person is a being capable of reason, capable of self-consciousness. Metaphysically, a person is an I, an individual with reason. Metaphysically, the category of persons includes all human beings, all angels, including fallen angels, the three persons of the Trinity, and any other rational beings that may live on other planets. If we were polytheists, we would have to extend it also to all of the gods. And even non-polytheists can also extend the concept to mythical beings, like Greek gods, elves, trolls, etc. So even atheists might want to extend the concept to cover the god they consider mythical. But in use today, the category of persons is smaller, not larger, than the category of human beings. For the very obvious and indefensible reason that some people want to murder other people and want to justify that murder by depriving their victims of personhood. In the past, these victims were Jews or blacks or the severely handicapped or slaves, and sometimes even women. Today, they are mostly unborn children. A distinction is made between human beings and persons only by those who want to kill some entities which are clearly of the human species, so that only some humans are granted personhood, not by nature or God or their objective metaphysical status, but by the subjective desires of other human beings, those in power. To justify the power to kill persons, they first kill meaning. For whether we want to kill unborn children or dying patients or ourselves or someone in pain, it is we who will to draw this line between the part of humanity whose quality of life qualifies them to live and those whose quality of life does not. That is, those who have a life unworthy of life. And those fatal words of the famous title of the book by the German doctors that made possible the Holocaust. My last point is the practical consequences of this use. I think the most fundamental question is not where the line is drawn between those who may be killed and those who may not, but who draws it, or rather, what draws it. Is it objective reality or subjective will? Is it nature or man? If nature draws the line, it is clearly drawn at the borders of the nature of man. Whoever has human nature is a human person. And all persons are intrinsically valuable or have a right to life or not to be murdered. So the fundamental question is it natural law or positive law? Is the line recognized or positive? Discovered or created? I hope you now see the disastrous effects of nominalism and its denial of objective natural essences. It makes possible the justification of any atrocity at all, as long as it is willed. Who it is willed by is a question that makes a difference, but whether it is the individual or the state, whether it is the minority by power or the majority by vote, whether it is by social consensus or by some other process, that matters only accidentally. What matters essentially is that man has now said to God and nature, "Excuse me, you're sitting in my seat." There's a great line in the movie Judgment at Nuremberg, in which one of the Nazi judges who carried out Hitler's will and began to deprive the first targeted groups of their full legal rights, pleads in defense of his kowtowing to Hitler's demands that they were not responsible for all of Hitler's atrocities because, quote, "we didn't know it would come to that." And the American judge replies, "It came to that the first time you denied one person his human rights. Once the nose of that camel is under the tent, the rest of the camel will eventually follow, because it's a one-piece camel." The defenders of assisted suicide, euthanasia, and abortion, which are almost always the same people, by the way, typically accuse their opponents of imposing sectarian religious values on a secular public. They argue that the central question is the question of the Paul Newman pro-euthanasia propaganda movie, Whose Life Is It Anyway? In other words, it all depends on your religious faith. It's simply a God question. The answer, of course, is that that's simply not true. What is in question is not, first of all, God, but the natural law. The value of human life is not dependent on religion, either religion in general or one religion in particular. As a matter of fact, the founders of all the major religions in the world have taught a sense of the sanctity or holiness or intrinsic value of human life and the morality of thou shalt not murder. That is, the injustice of killing innocent human beings. Abraham, Moses, Jesus, Muhammad, Buddha, Lao Tzu, Confucius, Hinduism, even much of paganism. And this is shared by many agnostics and even atheists, for it does not depend on any specific religious revelation as its origin. In the terms of Socrates in the Euthyphro, God wills a thing because it is good. A thing is not good merely because God wills it. God is not an arbitrary, willful tyrant. Even God is not a voluntarist. His words are not, because I say so and I'm the boss, that's all. But come, let us reason together. God himself respects the natural law, for it is an expression of his own nature, his character. No less than 5 possible attitudes are possible with regard to the relation between the natural law and religion, between religion and intrinsic moral values or moral absolutes, or what C.S. Lewis in The Abolition of Man called the Tao. The first relationship would be an explicit religious faith in God as the sole justification for moral absolutes, combined with a distrust of reason and natural moral law. That's the position of the fundamentalists, whether Christian, Islamic, or any other. Second is an explicit faith in God and also in natural moral law known by reason and conscience. That's the position of the Bible, of classic Christianity, Reformation Protestant as well as Catholic and Orthodox, of religious Judaism, and of medieval Islam. The third is a strong implicit piety without an explicit God. This is the attitude of Socrates, of pious pagan Romans, of Chinese Confucians, and of many modern religious agnostics who are nevertheless moral absolutists. The fourth is an explicit atheism and a consequent repudiation of all moral absolutes. This could be called atheist fundamentalism, because it shares with religious fundamentalism a belief in the total dependence of moral absolutes on God, and thus a denial of natural law. The fifth possible relationship is one that I don't fully understand, although it's probably the most popular one in our society. It's liberal or modernist religion, which combines belief in some sort of God with moral relativism. This is the position of New Agey thinkers, if we may dignify them with that now. I think they're really feelers rather than thinkers. This is the most irrational and inconsistent position of all, and it is unfortunately the position of most of the mind-holding media in our culture, like Oprah and Oprah. No society in human history has ever survived very long without a strong affirmation of the natural law. The 5 societies that have survived and thrived the most and had the most influence on all subsequent history are exactly the 5 that have had the strongest moral convictions: Mosaic, Christian, Confucian, Islamic, and pagan Roman society. In light of history, Western civilization has 3 and only 3 possible futures: to repent of its positivism, voluntarism, and relativism and survive, or to persist in it and perish, or to well-established laws in human history. I wouldn't advise you to bet any money on possibility number 3. It's almost like jumping off a cliff and hoping that the law of gravity is revoked before you hit the ground. I'm finished, but you're not. I have some time for questions. I apologize for not being able to stay for the question and answer session at 5 o'clock, so let's have a little one now.
Professor, can you explain a little bit more about the loss of form in our culture today? How is the sense of form, so many people look for form or beauty to look up to, what's contributed to the loss?
Well, the obvious answer to the question is the success of science. The notion of an abstract universal metaphysical essence isn't very good for science. Medievals had a fascination with science, but they didn't have the method for it. You have to have a reductionistic method in science. And since science is so spectacularly successful, it's a little bit like a teetotaler who discovers the joys of wine and becomes an alcoholic. That's all he wants to drink for the rest of his life. So anything that's not scientific, such as metaphysics, is rejected as meaningless, even though it's commonsensical. Another reason I suspect that's more popular is a more immediate moral reason. If there are no universal essences, then there are no absolutely universal moral laws, and I can be justified in making an exception for myself whenever I want. Bishop Sheen once said, "I never met an intellectual atheist. They're all moral atheists. They don't want a God looking over their shoulder and telling them what to do." Beyond that, I don't know. It's anybody's guess. I don't think you need to diagnose the cause of the disease in order to treat it.
I'm thinking in your discussion of points 1 and 2, the work of Lev Shestov in Athens and Jerusalem, the great Russian Jewish philosopher, where he says that the problem with modern man, especially European man, was the subordination of the God of Abraham, Isaac, and Jacob, and Jesus of Nazareth, to the God of the philosophers, where this God that wills all things can become subordinate to Moira and Ananke, to fate and necessity, and then it really reduces the biblical God to no more than Greek superheroes. Could you comment on that?
Yes, the difference between Aquinas' God, let's say, and the modern God is that the modern God assumes a contrast between the God of the philosophers and the God of Abraham, Isaac, and Jacob. The God of the philosophers has become simply the God of modern philosophers, the deist God who simply pushes the universe into motion with a billiard cue. In reaction to that, the God of Abraham becomes just a subjective God who has nothing to do with science. Thus you have two separated, desiccated things that don't fit together because they're too little. Aquinas would certainly not have agreed with the Tertullian's notion that there's no concord between Athens and Jerusalem and no concord between the God of the philosophers and the God of the Jews. Because the God of the philosophers of Athens and the God of the Jews in Jerusalem was both thicker than those two slices. So thick that there's a lot of overlapping. Because real things are thick. Abstractions are thin.
Predominantly has that belief in God combined with moral relativism. How do we create that cultural shift?
Yeah, how did our society ever get to the position where we combine belief in God with moral relativism? Well, by wishful thinking, by a kind of implicit New Age, create your own reality philosophy. Most people don't want to be atheists. Especially in America, where life is pretty comfortable and it's a good day, and you want to have somebody to be grateful to. I pity the poor Buddhists who have this wonderful capacity for gratitude, but haven't the faintest idea who to be grateful to. So we like God on good days, but we don't like God on bad days, when things get tough, and he says, take the tough and heroic line. So we combine the two by saying there's a God who doesn't issue commandments, but issues values. The Pillsbury Doughboy God. Better than none, and better than the God of Abraham, Isaac, and Jacob, whose love is tough.
What is your argument to those that would say that those when you're arguing moral certainty, that when someone responds and says, well, those are your morals, not mine. So they grasp it.
I once had a class like that, and I said, okay, I agree with you. You've converted me. I'm a moral relativist. It's all my morals versus yours. Now, my morals are, everyone flunks this course who doesn't agree with me 100%. And everyone who has orange hair flunks the course because I hate orange hair. And everybody who is female, but not as beautiful as Elizabeth Taylor, flunks the course too. And they said, you can't do that. And I said, yes, I can. I'm the boss here, I can do it. But that's ridiculous. Well, by whose standards? Yours, not mine. But that's not fair. Oh, fair. Fair. What does that mean? Just? Are you imposing your standards of justice on me now? Or are you appealing to some common universal standard that you and I are both supposed to know about? When push comes to shove, everybody really does believe in an objective moral law. But you have to make push come to shove. Most of us are reluctant to do that. We don't like to either push or shove. We like to be nice and pat on the head. But if we're Christians and we follow Jesus, Jesus shocked a lot of people. To put it mildly.
Personhood. It seems the new thing, brain science and everything is there's no self.
I don't think many people believe that. Not who's there, nobody. Nobody who, nobody you. There's no self there? If there's no self there, who's knowing that there's no self there? I guess a mystic would say that at one extreme, because the mystic has lost all self-consciousness in this wonderful ecstatic experience. That's beyond ordinary consciousness. But the skeptic who says there is no self, he's not a mystic. He's subhuman. Maybe a mystic is superhuman. So how do you deal with that? I don't know. My instinct is to say you need an exorcist, not a philosopher. Seriously, if anybody wants to believe that there is no self, there's something demonic about that, because the self is the image of God. It's holy, the I. If you don't want to say I am, that's suicide. That's spiritual suicide. And all suicide is deicide, because man is God's image.
It seems as though a lot of the conversations, especially when we're talking about life and definitions, have to do with what you very nicely put out. There are people who look at life and they give reasons why it should be extinguished. And your argument about how devoid that is of any kind of philosophical foundation. My question is this. Do you think that in a culture that is going further and further away from almost these scholastic types of terms of essence and the like, needs to be introduced back into this wealth of human tradition, expressed in a different way than it possibly had from the time of Thomas Lexington?
I can answer that question in a single syllable. Yes. I guess. The crop is dying. The thing to do is not so much to deal with the crop, but to deal with the roots, or rather to deal with the soil. We need to fertilize the soil. Pre-evangelism, they call it. Without philosophical roots, you don't have a theological plant that works. And without philosophical roots, you don't have moral plants. Ethics depends on metaphysics. And ethics uprooted from metaphysics is like a plant uprooted from this ground. So there's no alternative. You do have to restore that ancient vision. Now, it doesn't have to be in scholastic language. There are other language systems available. And we know enough about the world now and other systems like Confucian China to realize that some of these other language systems are just as useful and cast a different perspective on the very same realities as our own. So I think that's a great opportunity. People are fascinated with something like Hindu philosophy or Chinese philosophy or Native American philosophy. And if it's honestly taught, you will see the Tao of natural law there.
In our egalitarian part of nominalism, the radical egalitarian, I found this last election, people were telling me, it's all the same. There's no hierarchy of values. War is the same as abortion. So you say pro-life. There's no qualitative difference. How do you address that?
Well, the motive for that, I think, is so that you never have to pronounce the W word. Remember the old Happy Days episode where Fonzie, who's very cool, has made a mistake. He advised Ralph Mouse, who's a real geek, to join the Marines. This is ruining Ralph's life, but Ralph worships Fonzie as God, so he joined the Marines. And Richie, who's the only really on-target guy there, realizes what's happening. So he persuades Fonzie that he's got to undo the harm he's done. And he's got to tell Ralph, he's got to admit to Ralph that he made a mistake. That's hard, it's not cool. But yeah, I gotta do it. All right, so you see Ralph in his Marine uniform, and he's looking miserable. As soon as he sees Fonzie, he puts on a fake smile. Hey, Fonzie, how you doing? No. How you doing, Ralph? Oh, great, Fonzie. Thanks for making me a Marine. It's the best thing I ever did in my life. Well, you know, Ralph, that day that I told you to join the Marines, yeah, Fonz, I can't say that word, it's not cool. The W word, wrong. If everything's the same, nobody's wrong. If values are like ice creams, I like vanilla, you like chocolate, nobody's wrong. How nice. The problem with that is that somebody is wrong. Those nasty traditionalists who believe in a natural moral law and want to impose their values on us, they're wrong. The only people that are wrong, because the only value is tolerance. But they're intolerant, so they're wrong. So you got to say the conference. And once you open that box, the question comes out: well, is anything else wrong? Was the Spanish Inquisition wrong? Was the Holocaust wrong? Oh, then a few other things were wrong. Well, why were they wrong? You can, I think, get into an honest conversation with most sane people, maybe not philosophers, but most ordinary people, about right and wrong. And maybe I'm a cockeyed optimist, but I think that in their heart of hearts, they know that they're wrong in saying that nothing's wrong and that everything's equal. I don't think it's helpful to start by telling them where they're wrong. You refuse hierarchy only because you like Fonzie or you're arrogant. No, use the Socratic method. Just ask why. You know, little kid. No, why do you think nothing's wrong? Oh, because, well, reason backwards instead of forwards. We tend to reason forwards. We want to prove our conclusions, so we have brilliant syllogisms, and from the premise comes the conclusion, and we're very impressed, but nobody follows it. Why? Because that's not where they are. So find out where they are and find out their premises and the premises of those premises and keep asking why. And eventually, I think you can show them something questionable. And they won't bow down and say, thank you for converting me, but they'll go home and question themselves. And they will plant seeds of doubt.
One more.
Yeah.
Can't hear you.
At what point do you do what? Oh, with regard to something like abortion, the question is, at what point do you pray rather than taking action? At no point. You pray all the time and you act all the time. As far as you can. I mean, this is something that you have to be Churchillian about. Never, 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 never give up. You're Frodo and Sam and you're carrying the ring to Mordor, and you're flat on your face and you're in this slag heap, and it's absolutely impossible that you'll ever succeed. What do? You just keep moving one step in front of the other and keep slogging forward, do what you can. You don't ask questions like that.
To keep on schedule, we have to kind of plow ahead to our next talk. That was a very fantastic presentation. Our next presenter is a sociologist, Dr. Stephen Sharkey from Alverno College in Milwaukee, Wisconsin. And Dr. Sharkey has a very interesting title that I'll let him hopefully